Before getting started, we all just wanted to remind everyone that if you have any questions as the panel goes on, that you can submit them at the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen.
So in the spring of 2020, we took part in the art history seminar where this entire exhibition began. Led by Professor Curley, we delved into learning about the history of Black artists in this country. Each week, we studied, wrote on, and fell in love with the magnificent and powerful pieces from Wes and Missy Cochran's collection of African-American works on paper, which ultimately came together in our class's curation of the exhibition Explorations of Self, now open at the Haynes Gallery.
As interns, we have each focused on different aspects of the exhibition process and have had the incredible opportunity to witness what it takes to put a show together firsthand. This experience has been extremely formative for us, and we want to extend a warm thank you to everyone who has been involved in the exhibition to make it possible. Over the course of this hour, we will be diving into the origins of the Cochran Collection, the virtual curation process at large, and the significance of this exhibition in our current climate. Additionally, we will be discussing the significance of the fact that this show of Black artists was curated by predominantly white individuals. We would first like to thank all of our panelists for being here with us today and introduce everyone.
You're muted, Olivia.
First, we'd like to welcome Wes and Missy. Wes and Missy Cochran of LaGrange, Georgia, have been collecting Black contemporary art for over 40 years. Their unique collection is built out of love and admiration for the artists and their pieces as they began acquiring works in the 1970s from a community of artists that were not being purchased nor represented in the mainstream gallery scene at the time. Their passion for education, coupled with their generosity, has led to the collection touring the US since its inception, specifically in areas where access to major metropolitan institutions is limited and where these works would not otherwise be seen. We extend warm gratitude for access and engagement with the collection and their time with our class and exhibition team throughout the curatorial process and exhibition of the works. As students, we want to first extend a warm thank you to Professor Curley before our formal introduction. Professor Curley's leadership throughout this process has made the exhibition possible. From our class and our intern team, we wanted to personally thank you for dedicating so much of your time and energy into the course that preceded this exhibition. You opened up all of our eyes to see beyond the perceived art historical canon, not to mention welcomed every one of our ideas with openness as we virtually navigated these works in this exhibition each week in class during the spring. At Wake Forest University, Dr. John Curley teaches courses in 20th and 21st century American and European art, as well as the history of photography. His research explores the ways that post-war art in both the United States and Europe intervenes into larger realms of visuality, the mass media, and politics, especially during the period of the Cold War. Explorations of Self, Black Portraiture from the Cochran Collection is the product of his 2020 seminar course, Contemporary African American Art, Exhibition and Display. The class researched the collection and its artists, as well as the larger history and conditions of artists of color and their work, to create a thematic vessel for the exhibition. His leadership as a teacher and scholar helped to make this exhibition possible.
Next, I'm going to introduce Paul Bright. Paul Bright was born in Cleveland, Ohio. He received his BFA from the University of South Carolina. While still a university student, Bright was employed as a preparator and installer for an art museum. Subsequently, he has occupied diverse roles within art entities and museums. As an exhibition designer and conservation technician in a multidisciplinary state museum, a history museum design and exhibitions director, a freelance graphic and exhibition designer, a university art instructor, and as a curator. Bright arrived at Wake Forest in 2004 and became the director of Haynes Art Gallery in 2012. Bright has also maintained an active parallel life as an artist. His professional history includes exhibitions, projects, residencies, and collections in the US, Germany, England, Canada, Scotland, Italy, and Switzerland. Finally, I would like to welcome and introduce Carter BQ. Carter BQ earned a BA from Winston-Salem State University in English and a Master of Library and Information Science from North Carolina Central University. He has worked in both academic and public libraries as a reference librarian, community programmer, archivist, and bibliographer. He currently serves as an adult services librarian at the Stamford L. Warren Branch Library, a constituent of the Durham County Library, the second oldest independent African-American library in North Carolina. He has traveled to and lived in numerous foreign countries, been privileged to have befriended many great artists and art collectors, published articles and essays in books, magazines, and journals, and above all, he enjoys observing creativity unfold in people in various disciplines such as design, theater, visual art, architecture, rare books and bibliography, dance, music, photography, horticulture, general science, literature, etc. Carter believes people exist on planet Earth to use creativity and be creative in all human endeavors. So thank you all again for being here with us today. And without further ado, let's get started. Olivia, would you like to propose the first question for today?
Yes. So we want to start off with a more broad question to get everyone started, and we'd love to hear each of your thoughts, starting with Paul. So from each of your perspectives, why are the arts important in propelling change forward? What is their role in that, and do you think they can propel change?
I think in an exhibition like the current one in the Haynes Gallery, what I'm most interested in is seeing how the different artists answer that question in their own work. I think art registers and affects people in unpredictable and sort of unfathomable ways, and that art's messages and effects are often oblique, and sometimes they take time to actually show up in the viewer or the audience. I also think that's something that artists learn too, that even the most intentional direct messaging from their work is really an opening for interpretation, and the audience may land in a different place from where the artist intended them to, and in most cases that's okay. I often find that the art which uses what I consider its great strengths, ambiguity and complexity, can have the most lasting impact. Can get people to begin what I call free-range thinking, imaginative thinking that may also apply to non-art arenas of life, art that is directed sort of right at a problem, and that seems to promise a prescription for change. While it's sort of energizing in the moment, sometimes fails to actually affect that change. Change is very complicated. Even among people who generally agree, there can be a lot of dissension over the details of how that change becomes embedded in our lives. And I guess just to sort of wrap up that aspect of the question, I'm sort of mindful of the historical precedent of the radical Soviet artists from the revolutionary period, and how they basically promulgated a message through a very advanced aesthetic. And that aesthetic was cut off rather precipitously by Stalin. And the message is interesting too, because it was promoting a regime that we would now find pretty horrible in the end. But so what's left of their work is the aesthetic and material residue of it, sort of their beautiful failures. And that's kind of a cautionary tale sometimes.
Thank you, Paul.
Sure.
Would anyone, Professor Curley, would you like to share your thoughts?
Sure, just like quickly, I mean, I think Paul said it really nicely. I mean, I feel like this is a vast question. I mean, one could, there are whole reading groups and courses on art and politics, but for me, sort of three ways, really quick ways to think about it is that a work of art can imagine a more equitable world in sort of the utopian space of an artwork. So think about an abstract painting by Alma Thomas in the exhibition or others in a space of, a pure color exploration that doesn't sort of consider gravity or bodies. It's really about eyesight. And like, that's a utopian ideal. Another way is sort of an artist like Willie Cole, who investigates and sort of reframes sort of a canonical work of art that makes us rethink, sort of white privilege and think about, injustices in the art world. The way he reframes American Gothic to make us see these other histories that were there, just they're behind that canonical Grant Wood painting. Or it's, and this is really apropos of the Portraiture show that you both, helped curate, this idea that, exploring complexities of identity, whether it's Adrian Piper's work or Lorna Simpson's work, showing how like, a portrait is not just a two-dimensional snapshot of someone, but really something that forces us to wrestle with questions of race, identity, and all these other questions that make up a person.
Well, I think that I think of what George Santayana said, that those who don't remember history will have to repeat it. We're doomed to repeat it. And so when we look at the whole continuum relative to art, relative to the African American contribution to the great art world, we see that it really is all about continual change, and we're looking at the impact that artists have had on American history and also in the American art scene. I was thinking about the fact after listening to Professor Curley, you keep in mind that go back to the 1800s, and you had probably the first African-American painter, professional painter, Joshua Johnson, was actually there in Baltimore, was a contemporary of Charles Wilson Peale, but is painting the portraiture of the actual slave masters and their families. And of course, you had the Grafton Tyler Browns, you had the Robert Scott Duncansons, they're painting landscapes. So they're utilizing their art, their perspective on the world, on humanity, to make some very subtle changes. But they're using art as a mechanism in which to do it. So I think that art in itself, and all of the art forms, even dance, visual arts, these are tools and mechanisms to change people's perspectives, or to change cultural perspectives relative to people. And then also to bring them back together to point out how we are all interrelated beyond the very superficialities of skin and ethnicity. So I think that the whole ideal of the art, being a change agent, is just so inherent within everything, as it's all around us. And of course, looking at Wes and Missy's efforts over the past 40 years in terms of utilizing imagery and art to change people's perspectives, to introduce people to other people, to change people's perspectives relative to how they understand other people and how they understand society, how they understand the world. And so, that's and there have been a few people, rare people, who have decided to do that. If you look at the John and Dominique DeMino, they also did that with their work in Texas as Frenchmen, to change the perspectives of people, of African American people, at the height of the civil rights movement, to change the perspective of how people saw people of African descent. But they utilized the arts to do that in their project, and I think that project is still going on.
Thank you, Carter. Wes and Missy, do you want to share some thoughts on that same question?
I think it's been answered pretty good. Not much I could add to that, I think. But yeah, I think the art is very powerful. And to see the work here in the gallery is very powerful. And I think it reflects everything Jay and Paul and Carter have just said. So yeah, there's not much I could add to that.
That's okay. Well, I think you did add something really important, is the idea of physical presence within the space, and like how much that really can affect change, being really actually in front of the artwork itself. And I think before we actually move more into talking about the exhibition and the curation process, Wes and Missy, we would love to hear more from you about the gateway into this thriving community of artists that you came upon when you first started collecting Black art in the 1970s. Specifically, Camille Phillips, one of the incredible artists that we have in the exhibition, was a real catalyst for your collection. And can you briefly share your first time meeting Camille Phillips and what was her role within your collecting process at large?
Yeah, that was a watershed moment or a turning moment for Missy and me when we met. We actually met Camille the very first time would have been in 1988. We could try to tell that story, I suppose. Camille, there was a show in Atlanta, the first Black Arts Festival that year in 1988, in the summer of 1988. So Missy and I had heard about the show coming up, the festival. So we decided we should go because we were thinking about collecting or trying to see how we could collect African-American art. We had been collecting earlier in the 70s and 80s, but mainly it was white artists. And so we knew our collection, looking at it at that time in 1988, looked a little funny. We probably had 75 white artists, 2 women artists, and 2 Black artists in our collection. And that's exactly what you were going to have at that time if you were shopping in the mainstream gallery system. So we did actually step back and take a look at what we had and realized something was missing and very incomplete. So this festival in Atlanta gave us an opportunity, I think, to go and see a show that was being put on at that time at Atlanta College of Art. It was called 5 Black Women. And it was Camille Phillips, Howardina Pindell, Margot Humphrey, Faith Ringo, and Lois May Lou Jones. And all 5 of the artists were there. So we went to the show and went into the reception, a lot of people. And we did not really meet Camille. She, of course, always had a crowd of people around her. And she was a little intimidating looking. She has this huge black hat and all of this unbelievable jewelry, and then this very wild makeup on, and she, of course, had a mustache. So it was a little intimidating for Missy and me, but so we thought, wow, well, we sort of cornered Howardina, got her over in a corner, and was talking to Howardina and told her that we were interested in wanting to collect African-American art. And she said, well, look, if you're serious about doing this, you need to call Camille Phillips. And she gave us Camille's number. This is before cell phone or internet, really, or anything. So we went, we did, and we went to New York within a couple of weeks. We were there. And so we called Camille. I called her when we got into the city, and called her. And she answered the phone, and we were talking for, Camille liked to talk. And so we were talking for a while. And finally, she said, oh, well, are you black or white? And I said, well, I'm white. I know she heard the Southern accent, but she said, well, you come on down here anyway. So Camille and her husband, Jim, had a place on the corner of Broadway and Broome in Soho. So Missy and I go down there to meet her, and got there and got up to her place on the 7th floor. And wow, we were there for probably at least 3 or 4 hours, that first encounter. And looking at Camille's collection that she had hanging in the loft, and of course, visiting her studio. And we just had a wonderful time. And she did exactly what I would hope she would do, and that is that we did not buy any art that day or anything. She said, "You don't know anything. I want you to take these books," so Missy and I left there that day with 2 armfuls of books to get ourselves informed. And so that led to some 30-year relationship after that first meeting. And it was so beautiful because if we were going to collect African American art, if we at that moment we would have had to have met Camille somewhere along the way. But fortunately for us, it was the very first move we made was meeting Camille. There was no wasted movements or moments, and so wow, we started collecting African American art not too long after that, and so Camille really helped us in so many ways, and is sort of the curator of our collection.
That's such an amazing story, and thank you so much for sharing it. And I think you touched on something so important, is this idea of educating yourself before you started the collection process at large. And I think you're continuing to do that by sharing this collection with students like myself and Olivia. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to work with your collection. I also just want to mention too that Carter and Wes and Missy have known each other for quite some time. And Carter, you've kind of seen the collection grow. How have you seen it change and grow?
Well, I think I like to, point out how I first actually met Wes and Missy. And, they've been surrounded by art for a very long time. But when I actually first met Wes and Missy, and their reputations preceded them. But when I first met them, they were actually surrounded by artists. We had gone to a friend of ours. We have a mutual friend, Carrie Davis, in Atlanta. And we had gone to a memorial service for one of the prominent artists that's in the Cochran Collection, Mildred Thompson. And so I asked Carrie, I said, Carrie, I see a hat that's surrounded by a bunch of people. I said, who is that and what is that? He said, oh, that's a big boy. I said, which big boy? He said, that's Wes Cochran. I said, now that's interesting. I said, so what's going on there with that mob of people around him? He said, they're probably either trying to sell him some artwork, or they're trying to get his opinion of some artwork that they're working on. So that was the first time that I actually met Wes and met Missy a little bit later on after the memorial service. But I think that the changes in the collection, and Wes alluded to it earlier, going back to the mid-70s primarily, about the Andy Warhols, about the European American artists. But then, of course, that pivotal moment when they meet Camille Phillips. So then you see that major shift that starts to take place about 1988. But the other thing too is, Wes and Missy have such wide-ranging and divergent interest, just that the curiosity that they have about most things. So many people probably don't realize that Wes also has some folk art. He's interested in photography. They're interested in a number of different things. The Reverend Albert Wagner collection is quite unique. So I think that as a result of their wide-ranging interest and their curiosity, just about life in general and the arts, it's very difficult to kind of put them into just a small bag. They operate out of a big bag. So put them in and say, well, they only collect print. I said, no. And I'm always amazed at just the number of exhibitions in a vast number of mediums that they have there at the Cochran Collection. So I think that's the piece of where you see the collection start to change, is that you can't just put it within the small confines of a print collection, because I think that the Cochran Collection also is composed of many other mediums and also various genres of work as well. So,
yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing that and sharing your perspective there. I really appreciate that. And I just sort of want to move on next to a little bit more of a broad question, and also a question that's really been at the center of a lot of the curation that we did as students, and I think continues on even when we give tours in the gallery space, especially, and have these conversations. So among our class that curated this exhibition, along with the collectors, our professor, and the gallery directors, all involved were predominantly white individuals, with only 3 non-white students in our class. With that said, why is it important to acknowledge and discuss the fact that the show was curated by predominantly white individuals? Carter, I don't know, would you like to start off this question and answer?
Well, I think that there's a historical continuum for this very same thing. You know, so what you're doing is, in effect, it is unique, but it's not unique. You know, I mentioned Jean and Dominique Domino. Of course, you had the Harmon Foundation. They operated from 1922 up to about 1962, but they also put their fiscal resources and their publicities behind the bringing to the forefront work of African American artists. You know, so in effect, so you have done some you are doing something that is very unique for this particular point in time, but it is not necessarily a something that's new and unique, because, you know, you're a part of a continuum, a historical continuum that has always taken place, albeit not as it has not been in the forefront now, but there have been unique individuals, you know, Wes and Missy and many other people who saw the humanity, they saw the creativity, they saw the genius of these African American artists who were not necessarily promoted or known in the broader world. You know, so
Professor, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so what you are doing is really just a part of a greater continuum of what a few individuals have done. Now, of course, it's starting to become much more popular now, primarily in the great art world. But there have always been a few unique individuals who did not follow the crowd. They did not follow the masses of people relative to their development of their aesthetic eye, relative to their understanding of the value that these artists brought to the greater American art scene.
Professor Curley, we also wanted to turn to you for this question as the professor teaching the class. So how do you understand your role as a white professor teaching students about Black artists and constructing an exhibition that revolved around Black art?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And first of all, you know, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm not an expert on Black art, and never, you know, wouldn't claim that. I think a good way to answer this question is to kind of go back to the origins of the exhibition. As Wes and Missy mentioned, they have an amazing collection of, you know, 60s and 70s, you know, basically mostly white American art. And this is kind of what I learned in graduate school. It's, you know, it's a lot of Warhols, you know, Frank Stella, Robert Rauschenberg. This is kind of my graduate school wheelhouse. Like, so I could have easily imagined, you know, having students together, putting a show together about like pop and abstraction in America, and it would have been a great show, but it would not have been an important show. And I think that's what the opportunity that Wes and Missy's amazing collection presented us, me as a professor and the students, is this real opportunity to delve into these important questions of race. And when the exhibition was kind of in its genesis moment, sort of dinner time conversations and sort of talking to administrators in the department, and Paul and Katie and Jennifer Finkel and, you know, and Wes and Missy, and there was Wake Forest is going through its own sort of reckoning. There are a lot of, you know, emerged, there were, you know, a lot of pictures of blackface in the yearbook. You know, we had questions of the original campus near Raleigh and the involvement of enslaved individuals, you know, on that campus back in Wake Forest's very origin. And so that, that sort of moment was not only a way for us to, acknowledge like what we don't have in our department, an expert who teaches, Black art, but also what we have, to acknowledge this sort of this racial reckoning at Wake Forest. So the show has been really important in that way for, I think, for the students and for the university. And I will also say that teaching is not just about teaching, it's about learning. And I've really, done the best I can with, the resources I have at the library and getting my hands on books, but but I think teaching in class is also learning material. And so I think that's an important thing that we should remember.
Definitely. Paul, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I'm going to take just a little bit different tack in the sense that my definition of the purpose of art, if you can even call it that, would be to locate the artist and the audience in the world and express our understanding of existence through the experiences of art. So then we carry all of our sort of personal baggage along with us. We carry class and experience and gender and race and age with us. And we sort of emanate these things, these qualities, and we also project them onto art and other people, whether we're aware of it or not. And acknowledging who curated the show and of what kind of work, I think is an important part of being transparent about that baggage that we haul around and bring to it. There's much claim for achieving objectivity, or at least trying to, but I think really it's more useful on a daily basis to be honest about our subjective selves and how we bring our subjective selves to all these activities, and how actually something like curating an exhibition or selecting work really brings them to a head. And having these conversations while an exhibition's in its genesis or even in the research phase is very interesting. And it becomes, as you saw as interns in this exhibition, how they become pointed and real within the space when the actual work is in the space and it's talking to you and it's talking to other works. And that's the richness of it. That's the ambiguity of it. That's kind of the magma that keeps the whole thing alive. But it's also problematic, and it has to be acknowledged there too.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of you sharing your ideas. Carter, I love that really important point that like this is a continuum, and this is just the beginning of change that needs to start to happen. And Professor Curley, from a professor perspective, the idea of always learning and always engaging and seeing the holes in the department and seeing where we now need to make concrete change is also extremely important. And Paul, to your point of subjectivity, I couldn't agree more. And being in the space with the artworks from a virtual standpoint versus the physical standpoint, it completely changes the way you looked at the work. So thank you all for taking the time to answer that question. Olivia now has another question for you guys.
Yes, thank you all so much. And definitely relating to curating an exhibition virtually, we wanted to start with Professor Curley and just talk about your concerns when we transitioned to virtual learning and we began curating a show virtually. How did you think that our final product changed due to the circumstances? If you could elaborate on that.
Sure, my concerns were all of them initially. I mean, it was such a stressful time. We were scheduled to travel to LaGrange on March 12th. Remember that magical time back in March, and the world shut down around March 13th. So I canceled the trip like on March 10th late, so we really was sort of like, we almost got to LaGrange. So my primary concern was, the students not seeing works in person, and curating a show without seeing works of art in person kind of doesn't really gel. That's not really a thing that is often done. You can buy houses on Zoom, houses on sight unseen, but exhibition sort of seems really crazy that way. And so that was my main concern, but Wes and Missy really were so generous with their time, making themselves available for Zooms in the classroom. Remember that great meeting we had when they actually were sitting next to their flat file and pulling works out and like showing the works onto the Zoom screen. And so it was no substitute for being there, but it was something. It was something, to work with. And I think, the idea of us having that exhibition, something concrete and tangible that would happen, it's also really profound in a moment of, of really, this sort of Zoom world and feeling disconnected from materiality and objects. So I feel like all the students, we never talked about this, but I feel like it all was very, made our work seem more urgent. And of course, once the summer happened with the horrific murder of George Floyd and the protests, the exhibition has seemed all the more urgent for this, for the students. And I think talking to individual students on email during that summer, there was some discussion about portraiture being sort of especially relevant in this moment. An honorific portrait of someone is, in some ways saying that person's name, which is such an important part of this moment, is sort of remembering, the individuals who have been slain and murdered by the police. So it was a really complex time, and with COVID and the protests, but we did the best. I think the students did the best we could, and everyone, the exhibition somehow miraculously came together in a beautiful, lovely way, which is also a testament to the quality of the works that Wes and Missy have in their hands.
Yes, definitely. And I think for all of us, it really felt like the light at the end of the tunnel to be able to see it and see an exhibition in person. Paul, just if you want to add on to that, obviously you've curated dozens of shows as the director of Haynes. How was tackling this exhibition different for you and your team?
Yeah, so this was different. Some of the shows that we do, and a lot of them actually we curate ourselves, or we organize with the involvement of artists, or some are collaborations with faculty. We consistently work with students on their own shows at our student gallery. But this was the first exhibition we've done that was conceived as an outcome conceived as, the culmination of this course about Black artists from a collection outside the university. The whole thing was built towards the culmination called the exhibition. And when it's a big thing with moving parts like this, I find that one of the best things that we can do in the gallery as the professional staff is to mentor, to facilitate, to help where we can help, and then mostly get out of the way. Because you guys came with really strong concepts, with a number of ideas that you wanted to try in the space once the works arrived. And we were all very interested in seeing that play out. And you'll remember when we uncrated things and started moving them around the space, we tried a number of different things to see how it would work and how it would actually flow. But I think that our role in that case, much like it is when I work with artists, it's like you have already received the initial signal from their work. You're interested in it, you want to hear more about it, and you just want to let them talk about it a little bit, show you what they've done, and to help the thing along its way rather than to take control of it or overmanage it. So I hope that's what we did. That's what we tried to do.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And to that point, when we were thinking about the space conceptually, we were like, oh, there are all these things we can do with it. But once we got into the space, the works really spoke for themselves. And I think that's really important to consider. So moving on to another question, I want to propose this to Carter, especially as someone who is so involved in the zeitgeist of our current times and everything. So in light of recent cultural and social events in America that Professor Curley did touch on briefly, how do you think that changed the significance and importance of this exhibition in the Wake Forest and Winston-Salem communities more specifically?
Well, I recall, based on your question, I recall that there was philosopher Victorino Tejeda who taught at Howard University, and he wrote a book back in the 60s, I believe it was called Art and Intelligence. And so he poses the statement that to be creative is to be human. So this whole ideal of art as an evolving and the work of artists as something that is ever evolving. We see the very same thing also within societies. There's always an evolution as people grow, that we start to see changes in attitudes and behaviors, the interaction and engagement with our fellow human beings. So this particular this particular exhibition, you know, looking at the whole idea of art, creativity, being the catalyst for human change, societal change. We can really look at this whole thing of taking heretofore images and artists who may not have been known to the viewer, but by their having the opportunity to view the spirit of the artwork and maybe gain some understanding by later study about the artist, to understand their humanity as a way to somehow say, listen, I see you. What you see is actually you. Our commonality, our human commonality is actually seen by what you see now. And it might be different predicated upon ethnicity. It might be different predicated upon education, just people's general experiences. But there's a human aspect and a human element that is there. And the art will be the thing that changes the human perspective. So I think that given that everything that is taking place now, and as I said previously, you know, there's nothing new under the sun. You know, it's a different time. You know, it's a different time, but the experiences, these things that we're going through now, we've gone through these things before, and we would just have a different solution to what is taking place now in order to solve these human dilemmas relative to who we are as human beings. So I think that the ability to see the artwork, and you know, that's the thing that we have to get to, and that will probably be the role of you as future art historians, curators, museum professionals, is to utilize this art to whatever art it is, if it's African American art, it's European art, it's Indian art, but to how does this art somehow reflect our humanity? And I think that that's where we are, you know, what this is really about, the bigger picture.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I think you touched on something so important about the idea of visibility in art, and conversely, the history of invisibility that's been within art. And also the idea of like I found it very profound, you saying that in art, you can see someone's humanity. And I think that goes to show that individual change can be met with artwork. And so thank you so much for sharing and bringing that perspective to our panel today. Moving on to our last question before we take some of the questions from the general audience and everything. Wes and Missy, I wanted to ask you, how has this exhibition that we have currently at Haynes been different from some of the other institutional exhibitions that have utilized your collection? Have you noticed anything different about it? Is there something that stands out?
Well, I don't know how many places we've been where the students actually curated the show. We have been to places where they brought in grammar school kids to actually sometimes ask the questions, or even come in and sit on the floor and do their renditions of a piece of art that's hanging on the wall. But we've never had it like this at a university setting. I think this is a first for us. Is that right? Yeah. So, and to have Professor Curley create a syllabus and teach from our collection. That's 2 courses. Yeah, 2 courses. Yeah, that's never happened. And that was like really a reward for us to see that happen. That was really fantastic. So I think there were a lot of firsts for us. And we have actually been traveling this show, African American art, since 1991. So it's been traveling for, wow, I guess this is the 30th year. So yeah, this is the first time it's ever come together like this. and,
a portraiture.
And as a portraiture show, yeah. It's rather amazing, the job that everyone has done. And I know you put a lot of effort into it, and we thank you very much for doing that.
Well, thank you all so much for your participation and for sharing your thoughts. We really appreciate everyone taking the time. And we're now going to field a couple of questions from the audience in our last few minutes. So we got one question to Wes and Missy. It says, did your pivot in collecting focus impact your gallery relationships? Did traditional galleries start to adjust their representation slash exhibitions to meet your interests as a customer?
That is an interesting question, but it really doesn't apply to us. We really have no gallery relationship. If you think of this as when we started African American collecting in 1988, there is no galleries involved. There was none of these artists in this show were in a gallery. For us to put this show together, we went to the artist studio, and so we were so fortunate to be allowed into this inner sanctum of the artist studio. And so Missy and I were actually at the source of the production or the making of this art. So we actually did all of this collecting without dealing with the galleries whatsoever. There just was no gallery world for the African American artists at that time. So the artists seemed to have their own network, and it was a community of artists, especially in New York, and they supported each other. And so actually Camille, who knew everyone, Camille Phillips, she just actually sat down, wrote phone numbers and addresses down for us and said, go call these folks. Everyone's wanting to sell, so you should go. And that's exactly what we did. It was funny. We did open this African American show that has traveled. It's like 75 pieces. And we opened it in 1991 in Atlanta. And there was a gallery in Atlanta that handled a lot of the African American artists that we had collected. It was funny when the lady that had the gallery in Atlanta, she called Camille in New York and said, who are these people from LaGrange that are having this show in Atlanta? There's a lot of artists that she had in her stable. And she was calling Camille to find out because she had never heard of us, or we had never met her. She had never met us. And Camille's answer was, well, you thought all those chickens were in the yard. Some of those chickens aren't in the yard. That was Camille's response to her. So that's just the way it was at that time, and that's the way it worked for us. So yeah, we never really dealt with galleries.
Thank you for that answer. I think that is so important and says so much about the time period that you were collecting. So thank you for sharing. Next, we have a question from Dr. Morna O'Neill. And the question is, how important was the specific context and audience of or at Wake Forest to our curatorial decisions? I want to field this question to Paul and Professor Curley more specifically.
I think they want to hear from Lynn and Olivia here. So I think this question, because it's really about your curatorial decisions and your thinking about this process.
Yeah.
I'm like, I was just supposed to be a moderator, but yeah, I mean, I think for us, it changed. It was so much about it was about individual identity. And I think that's what we talked about the most. And I think so many of the artists in our exhibition, like some are coming at a very, from a politically active perspective and some aren't. And I think focusing on the individual artists as much as we could and just searching for that common theme the best we could throughout the curatorial process is what we tried to do. And I think with Wake Forest, it is, a predominantly white, very homogenous population of students. So I think we knew the whole time going through that it was going to be a really important and critical exhibition and spark a lot of important conversations around issues of the art history canon, yes, but also issues of identity at our own school and how can we create more spaces where students feel like they can express their individual identity without judgment, without feeling dismissed, without feeling unheard or unseen. So I think that was really at the center and crux of our curatorial decisions. Olivia.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, definitely we really wanted to create a space for people to see themselves and identify. But I think in addition to that, we really, the class for us or the exhibition for us was really an extension of our class. And I think that we really wanted it to be an extension of learning for everyone because we all go to this school and sit around talking about amazing things all day and, wanted to apply it to something more tangible, which is why if you go to the exhibition at the very end, we have a space for people to write their comments and share what they were feeling. So I think we really wanted it just to be kind of an extension of the classroom, like I said, and a place for people to share and discuss. And yeah.
But Paul and Professor Curley, if there's anything you guys want to say too, feel free.
You did so well. That's a perfect way to wrap that up.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. So this one here, we can finish it off with Wes and Missy. I think this is an important question of, what would you say to students in order to inspire them to be collectors? What would you say to people who want to collect art? And, how did you go about collecting art really?
Yeah, well, I think I would highly recommend it, collecting art. If you get out in the world and start making a little money, I would suggest you maybe put some of that into art. It's been a beautiful journey for Missy and me to have been involved in the art world. Being a collector, you really do have a 50-yard line seat at the table. And so everyone approaches it differently on how they collect. I think Missy and I may have had a little different approach, but I would suggest what Camille was always saying to us is you should, always look where no one else is looking, right? There's always the better deal. And of course, try to train your eyes as well as you can, which would require going through those doors of a gallery and museums and looking, and trying to train your eye to composition and how a piece of art is put together. And if you will do that, it will happen. Even if it's osmosis, it will happen eventually. I don't proclaim to have the trained eye. I work at it, and I love to try to surround myself with people that do have a trained eye. And so It's a good place. I mean, there is a great saying that applies to a lot of things, but especially in art collecting, you know, if you want to make a small fortune in art, I think you start out with a large fortune or whatever. It's a good place to lose money if you're not careful. So if you want to do this, you do need, I think, some very good advice or get advice from people that are in the particular field that you're interested in collecting. Hopefully someone you can trust and someone that's very dependable. Missy and I had the great fortune of having several people like that, Camille Phillips and Corinne Jennings in New York, and also Bob Blackburn, Mildred Thompson. They helped us tremendously in putting this collection together. So yeah, you need some good advice along the way.
Thank you. That was great advice. And I know we've all learned so much from talking to you all for the past year. So thank you all so much for your questions. We're gonna wrap it up, but thank you for being here with us today. We are so grateful for the opportunity to have been a part of this exhibition and to have had this conversation. And we also want to extend a thank you to Steve for his help with the technology, and to Katie Wolf, Professor Curley, and Paul Bright for their leadership. And we also want to thank Wes, Missy, and Carter, of course, for their contributions and your time spent with us today.
And thank the moderators.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
And just to sort of close up here, these conversations are so important for us to be having on our campus. However, we do know and acknowledge that the work doesn't stop here. And we hope that this exhibition and panel discussion is just the beginning of meaningful change within the Wake Forest community and beyond. So thank you all again, and please do come see the show in Haynes Gallery. It will be up until March 28th. So we would love to have you visit if you can. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.